Okay, once again, through the power of social media, it looks like we're broadcasting live. This is another edition of the Wicked Awesome Report. I'm your host, Patrick Queally, and your friend in the mortgage business. Joining me today is my co-host, Declan O'Toole from Select Real Estate. Good morning, Declan.
Good morning, Patrick. How are you this morning?
Things are great. So Wicked Awesome Report, broadcasting every Tuesday and Thursday at 10 a.m. So give us a like, a comment, a share, head over to the Facebook page for Wicked Awesome Report and give us a like there to be notified when new videos come up and go live. So today we're talking about foreclosures, foreclosed properties. And a lot of times that seems to be a hot topic amongst buyers. And I see particularly first-time home buyers view buying a foreclosed property is a great way to get a deal. Everybody wants a deal, right, Declan? Everybody wants a great deal, especially buying their first home, getting their foot in the door in the real estate market. And some conflicting information out there in terms of buying a foreclosure. And is it really a deal? Can it be, or can it be a complete disaster? So part of today's show, what we want to do is try and help and maybe warn some consumers against some of those disaster areas to make sure they don't get in over their heads. So I guess it's partly what to expect or what you need to know if you're interested in buying a foreclosure.
Yeah, see and then that's the other thing. I think this is going to come up more and more. Let's say the next 18 months to 2 years. Now, I'm not exactly the oracle of Southie, so who knows where the market is going. I've been wrong before, believe it or not, Patrick. But I think people are certainly looking at the ears are coming up, and they're looking to see certainly distressed property. And of course, as you and I both know, and people that are listening to this have different levels of exposure to real estate. So I think maybe it might make sense too, just to explain what the different levels of distressed property are, so that we can go through each of them. We can probably explain.
Absolutely, yeah, because a lot of people think foreclosed properties and or use that term, and when they use that term, really, they mean a bunch of other sort of status of or stages of what that property is. So run through, Declan, the sort of the definitions or the different stages of what a lot of people generally consider, a foreclosed property is actually a couple of different stages. So how would you define those?
So you got, of course, part of the first off is who you're buying from. You're either buying from a homeowner, you're buying from a bank, or you're buying it at auction. They're distressed properties. So we call it distressed for now, and then we'll go into the actual foreclosures.
Okay, sure.
You've got, and I'll just go through actual definitions. You look at pre-foreclosure. That's the early dates. That's when somebody gets behind. Typically, it's 6 months or later. It's the early stages of which a bank is starting to repossess the property. It begins when the lender files a notice of default on the property because the owner has not been making the mortgage payments. That you'll see, and you'll actually start seeing that pop up on Zillow and other places. People are starting to get an interest in pre-foreclosure. It's not a foreclosure. That the buyer still owns the owner still owns the property.
Yeah, so the owner's still in control, and it's the owner that is the one who's actually listing the property for sale. The owner's still in the driver's seat.
Yeah, or they may not even have it listed yet, but it's at that stage whereby the public is aware.
Public notices are filed. Okay,
but a good segue to that is a short sale. That's real estate when you have an owner that's financially distressed, as we said before, and they try to sell their property, or they sell the property for less than the amount that's due on the mortgage. So they're shorting the mortgage amount. And then that'll be a situation where the buyer, it's a third party, it's not the bank. And, all the proceeds in that case would go to the bank or the lender. Those were fairly popular, if that's the right word, back, post 2008. Short sales kind of kicked in before the actual foreclosures did.
Yeah. So just a quick sidetrack there. So the distressed properties and the short sales, while they were popular previously, looking at my crystal ball here, I don't necessarily know we're going to see a whole bunch of those pop up on the market, just because of the run up in equity that people have had over the past few years. Now, where I think it may hit is, unfortunately, people that have been laid off due to the pandemic, have had interruption in income, that have only owned the property for a short period of time. They might only be there a year or two and haven't seen a large run up in equity in the property. I think those are the consumers that are probably at the highest risk of facing, some distress here and going into, as you phrase it, a distressed sale.
Actually, something else on that with regards to the short sales, I think something that you could certainly maybe speak to is with short sales before, people thought it wouldn't affect their credit. There was a lot of misinformation on the first go round, certainly on that. And, it's a bit like you're talking about deferring your payments on your loans.
Yep.
A lot of people got in a lot of trouble with short sales as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of misinformation, and I think there still is. But yeah, that type of a event is a significant, credit event, and it does impact your ability to be able to get financing in the future. So, but I think a lot of the people that are in that type of financial distress aren't necessarily concerned with or planning to buy their next place. It's simply just trying to get out from under their current situation. But just understand, yeah, that, even a couple of years down the road, that short sale is definitely going to play a part in you being able to get financing for the next place.
Then you go to a foreclosure, which is we hear about foreclosure auctions, which is the people typically think of that, you got the auctioneer on the doorstep. That's where it's the action of actually taking possession of the mortgage property when the mortgagor, which is the person that owns, actually the bank owns the property, is looking to take it over.
It's the consumer. Yep.
The consumer fails to keep up with the mortgage payments, and that's where that's what officially a foreclosure is defined as. There's also another one, which is where that auction, maybe it doesn't auction off, they didn't get the reserve price that the bank was looking for the property, and you have what they call real estate owned. That's where the property is, the lender takes over, they own the property. They typically go out to an asset manager, which is essentially a property manager, and very often they've got a real estate license as well, where they go in, they secure the property, deal with tenants if they happen to be there. Usually they vacate the property, clean it up, and then put it up for sale.
Mm-hmm. Well, you say clean it up. Clean it up doesn't always happen, though.
Yeah, so when I say clean it up, winterize it very often.
Winterize it, maybe board up the windows in terms of cleaning it up.
If the copper's gone, the copper's gone.
Yeah, so that dives into one of the first things that a buyer should be aware of if they're pursuing a foreclosed property, and it falls under the last category that you mentioned. And this business is just full of acronyms, but it's REO, real estate owned, meaning that the bank that had lent the money out for someone to purchase that home has now foreclosed on it. They have possession of the home. The consumer that was foreclosed on is no longer part of the picture. They've moved out. They've been evicted. They're not in the property anymore. And the bank that had issued the financing now has physical control of the property. So when people talk about foreclosure, that's typically what they mean, even though, as you mentioned, those other sort of statuses, lead up to that. So let's continue the rest of the conversation talking about specifically REO, real estate owned. So it's after all of the foreclosure proceedings have taken place and all the documents recorded at the Registry of Deeds, and the bank has physical possession of the property. Okay. So as a consumer, you're going out to take a look at that property because you want a deal. You think you're going to be able to buy that property below market value. Well, maybe not. Okay. So one of the things you need to be aware of is what is the condition of the home. So as you said, Declan, the bank is going to, clean up the property. But clean up the property is a nice euphemism for what's really going on. So I've worked with clients, and I myself have walked through foreclosed properties. And I'm going to say that a lot of times you're going to end up with essentially three categories in terms of condition. Okay. First category is it's in good condition or pristine condition. There's nothing wrong with the property other than the fact that the bank currently has possession of the property. Not that there's anything wrong, but what I mean is there's no physical defects with the property.
It's a financial foreclosure.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's no physical defects with the property. That's the ideal situation. Next along that scale is maybe there's some deferred maintenance. Now think about it. If the consumer that was in the home didn't have the financial capacity to keep up with the mortgage payments, do you really think that they were able to maintain the property, replace the windows, or replace the or patch the leaking roof, or whatever other sort of minor, I don't say handyman repairs, but just normal property maintenance? More than likely, those items have not been done, and that's in the deferred maintenance category. See a lot of foreclosed properties that fall into that category. And then further along the scale is you've got properties that have some significant damage. So either because the property is sat vacant for a while, you could have the tree that crashes on the house and cracks through the roof. You could have vandalism. Okay, so you say that the foreclosing bank has secured the property. Well, they don't always secure it in the best way, and continuously check to make sure that it's secured. So you get vandals that maybe break into the home and maybe steal the copper pipes, or maybe the homeowner that was being evicted, that was foreclosed on, has some anger issues over the financial situation and just literally tears the place apart, takes everything with them, including the kitchen sink. Okay.
And the kitchen sink has gone missing.
Correct. Yeah. And so I've certainly seen properties where people have broken in and stolen the copper pipes to take to the salvage yard to sell for cash. So when you have, property that is on that end of the spectrum that does have significant damage, as a buyer, you may be looking at it like a gold mine. Oh, this is great. We can get this property for a great price, get in there and we can make all these repairs and increase the value. Well, maybe. The difficulty is going to be actually getting your financing to purchase that house, because it's not going to pass an appraisal in its current condition. And we talked about property appraisals in prior shows, Declan. Basically, the home is the collateral for the loan. So the lender wants to make sure that that collateral is in good shape, basically, move-in ready condition. And when it's suffered from some deferred maintenance and vandalism, it may not be in move-in ready condition. So a lender may not approve financing to purchase the home in its current condition. So what do? Well, you're probably going to need construction or rehab financing to be able to purchase that home, if that's the case. And construction and rehab financing is typically more expensive. So now this great deal you think you had, slightly turning into maybe less of a great deal, because the financing to acquire it's going to be much more expensive than what you may have originally thought. So the condition plays a part.
Right. And you talk about, in terms of condition, it can go to the extreme too. We did talk about the copper, but I even know I've been on the management side of this for banks. I've gone in and found that, tenants have been in the building for almost 2 years. There was no furnace. It had actually no heat, but one tenant had electricity and everybody had cables and cords going everywhere. So that bank decided to sell it without a furnace. So you're buying a house that doesn't have a furnace. So you got to.
Yeah. And you can't get traditional financing like that. It has to be some sort of a, construction or rehab loan or private financing, not, non-bank financing for that buyer. Plus you get the issues, if there's people living in the home, they're squatters. So right. you got to deal with getting the squatters out, which is typically the selling bank's responsibility to deliver that home vacant. So the condition of the home is going to play a large part in determining if you can get financing at all and what type of financing you're going to be able to get. And I think that's definitely the value of having a experienced real estate agent like Declan working with you, walking through the property and just knowing what is going to be, a question mark or a problem or an issue when it comes time to get an appraisal done to purchase that home.
Speaking of appraisals, there is a value element too. It's not always the case, but very often you got to keep in mind a few different things, right? Obviously, foreclosures tend to be cheaper than other properties, but they can be risky, as you mentioned, because of the condition. But the other one may be a lot of foreclosed homes aren't in prime locations. So don't, just because you're, and again, they're not going to appraise out. If you're in a situation, you're buying a home, you think it's a great deal, it's a lot cheaper than the one that you saw, 2 streets over or in the next zip code. Again, you just got to be very aware of your market if you're buying a foreclosed home. Take into account, as you said, the items that need to be taken care of from a deferred maintenance perspective. I know we're going to talk a little bit about what they take on from the bank as well, but in the meantime, also be careful where you're buying, that you're buying a home.
Of course, I mean, because in any transaction, that's the one thing that you can't change. Location. That's it. So that's condition and location. The second major point, if you're interested in buying a foreclosure, that a lot of consumers maybe don't know but need to know, is in terms of negotiation and making an offer and getting to that purchase and sales agreement. So in a traditional sale, you're dealing with on the other end of the table, the seller is a natural person. It's an individual or a couple, or it's a person that you can talk to and maybe negotiate with. When you're dealing with a foreclosure, you're not dealing with an individual. You're dealing with an entity. What was that term that you used? Negotiating with
well, you're negotiating with a spreadsheet.
Yeah, exactly. You're negotiating with a spreadsheet. So it's not always a logical sort of common sense negotiation back and forth. You're negotiating against a formula or a procedure where the terms have to fall into that box in order to have a chance of getting accepted. It's black and white. There's no gray area. There's no back and forth. One of the other things that
essentially a template. A lot of times you got to fill in it's items.
Exactly. So even in MLS, that listing comes with basically a form you got to fill out as part of your offer, and all those terms get pushed into just a boilerplate purchase and sales agreement. So in a normal transaction, Declan, if the buyers and the sellers and their respective attorneys, respective real estate agents are negotiating on a point, and it's a paragraph that's in the purchase and sales agreement, and everybody mutually agrees, well, it's not going to be what the standard contract says. We want to strike this sentence or change it to this. If everybody agrees, I mean, you cross that out and everybody initials it and everybody agrees that that's what it's going to be. Is that a sort of a fair summary of how that negotiation
Absolutely
goes? Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the time you end up saying the same thing legally, but it's just different terminology. But there's a lot of over and back with regards to
exactly. But when you're quote unquote negotiating with an entity, with a bank that's foreclosing, there is no change. There are no changes allowed to that purchase and sales agreement. It's the standard boilerplate contract. If you want to buy the house, these are the terms you have to agree to, which may seem a little bit unfair, but again, you're not negotiating with the person, you're negotiating with a spreadsheet, with an entity, with a formula. So, those are the types of things you need to be aware of, and it can get frustrating when you can't get that sort of typical back and forth give and take in a normal negotiation, which I know you're excellent at, Declan, representing your clients doing that negotiation.
I'll try, but it can be frustrating. But I suppose when you talk about fairness, I suppose from the bank's perspective, if everybody's treated exactly the same, they probably see that as a fairer way to do it, right?
Yeah, I suppose so.
Fairness, at least.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah. I mean, it's sort of the great equalizer. Everybody has to live up to the same contract.
Hit the same brick wall.
Yeah, exactly. So that sort of dovetails into the next point that you need to be aware of from those negotiations, timelines. So a traditional transaction from making an offer and having the purchase and sales agreement signed to when you hit the closing table and all the financing pieces in between can take 30 to 45, maybe even 60 days. Okay, that would be, I think that it would be fair to say that in a traditional sale, give or take 45 days is an appropriate timeline to get you to the closing table. Okay, some are quicker, some are a little bit longer, but on average, 45 days. You think that's
Yeah.
fair?
So again, usually I reach out to the mortgage broker like yourself, Patrick, for the mortgage commitment. Usually, is the biggest last hurdle, right? So, yeah, so you look at 30 days usually, or actually like basically 3 weeks to after purchase and sale, 10 days to purchase and sale. After that, then you're looking at 3 weeks or 4 weeks, depending on how the financing set up. And then another week or so to close.
Yeah. So that's a traditional sale. So with a bank-owned property, an REO or foreclosure, you have to sort of suspend all angles of reality here. It's a completely different timeline because again, you're not dealing with an individual or a group of individuals. You're dealing with an entity, and they have their formula and their spreadsheet and their processing time. And it can take a while to get even just the accepted contract back signed by the appropriate parties. But what can happen, and unfortunately does happen quite often, is that you get 3/4 of the way through the transaction, and as the buyer, you have an attorney that is conducting the title work to make sure you're getting clear title to the home, that you have proper ownership of the home at the end of the transaction. Well, the attorney that is representing you and your lender to get that title work done finds out that there's a title issue. So what does that mean? Well, typically it means that the bank that had done the foreclosure, that now has physical possession of the property and is selling that property, that lender didn't follow all the right procedures in terms of getting that foreclosure done. Okay, so without getting into all the technicalities of it, there are certain documents that need to be filed in a certain sequence and a certain timeline in order for it to be a valid foreclosure. And the only way that lender, that bank can sell that property is if they follow that right sequence, filed all the right documents according to the right timeline, so that the day that you're purchasing the property, they're delivering to you, the correct bundle of rights in terms of property ownership.
We call that chain of title, Patrick.
Chain of title, exactly.
Title to the next title.
Exactly. So it's just the sequence of what happens, what document is recorded, signed by the appropriate people, recorded again in the right sequence. And sometimes that doesn't happen. Now, particularly here in Massachusetts, the foreclosure process can be quite cumbersome. Okay, there are documents that need to be recorded. The timelines are very, very specific. And if anything is out of sequence, out of order, or not signed properly, well, the closing attorney that's representing you is going to see that something was not done correctly, alert the foreclosing bank, and in a lot of cases, they got to start from scratch. They have to restart the foreclosure process from day one. So you could be looking at, with the required timelines, 60, 90, 180 days before they've satisfied all the requirements to be able to deliver a clear and marketable title to you as the new buyer. So as that buyer, that's a couple of months. You're sitting on the sideline. You've got, you signed a check, you have deposit money that's held in escrow. You want to buy this property that you think is a great deal, but now it's taking an extra several months to get to the closing table. The old saying, Declan, time is money.
Well, time is money, but the other part of that is if you're selling your home, if you've got 2 kids, and one thing with the other, at least with the traditional transaction, yes, there are delays. Things happen. A lot of the people involved in the transaction, but it's usually in a real-time basis. Mm-hmm. You might be out a week, right? You can work something out with your movers. You're looking at months down the road, and certainly if you're looking to do a simultaneous closing, which you're trying to sell your house and then move into the next house, you could put yourself in a very awkward situation.
Yeah, and I've seen it with first-time buyers buying a foreclosed property where they think they're that close to the finish line. The last thing we need is just that title work to come in. They've given notice to their landlord. They're moving out at the end of the month, and now there's a title issue. So they have to move out of their apartment or go from lease to month to month, and now they've got more housing expense than they expected for, because now they need to continue to rent, while this property is that those title issues get resolved.
Or moving
So,
with the in-laws.
well, exactly, yeah, and that's, so it's a cost in terms of dollars, but it's also a cost in terms of just energy. I mean, that can be really frustrating and be a real drain to think you're that close to owning a property that you think is a great deal, and then all of a sudden you got to slam the brakes on. Hold on, wait a minute. The bank that did the foreclosure didn't do everything correctly. We got to start over. Now, in today's market, where we see properties appreciating, that may not necessarily be a horrible thing, but in other markets where you don't see a steep level of appreciation, you agreed to buy the property, on March 1st for $300,000. But by the time you get to the closing 5-6 months later, the market has changed entirely, and maybe the fair market value is no longer 300,000. Maybe it's less. So again, time is money.
Appraisal.
Exactly. Time is money. And on the lender side, with that kind of delay, you have to provide updated financials. So you have to remain on the job. You have to send additional pay stubs, additional bank statements, maybe take a look at an updated or a new credit report, based on the amount of time that's gone by. And if anything has changed in your financial condition, well, you could be at jeopardy of that financing, be remaining approved for you. So many things that can go wrong the more time that goes by. And I hate, sitting here being Mr. Negative about it, pointing out everything on the bad side. But this is the stuff that the consumers, don't think about, don't know, but need to be aware of if they're, lining up trying to purchase a foreclosed property.
Yeah, again, the pros and cons. I think we're outlining the cons more so than the pros. It's still, in theory, less expensive, but then again, that depends on if you've.
Yep.
Your own spreadsheet comes in. You're negotiating against spreadsheet, but you want to make sure you have your numbers lined up. And that's, we can speak more to that as well in terms of what has to be done. That's the next thing. I suppose we get on to, Patrick, is what the typical sale. You've got the seller takes on a number of different responsibilities.
So we've got transactional costs that are different or can be different on a foreclosed property versus a traditional sale. So with a traditional sale, Declan, that the seller is typically going to be responsible for getting their smoke and carbon monoxide detector inspection. So the town and municipality has to send someone from the fire department out to the house to inspect, make sure the smoke detectors are in the right location and working order. Same with the carbon monoxide detectors. And in Massachusetts, that is a requirement. In order for a valid sale to take place, you have to have a passing, what we call the smoke cert. Okay. And typically, as the real estate agent, Declan, you're representing the seller. You're organizing for that inspection to take place. And that's typically a cost that's passed on to the seller. Typically, the seller is paying for those inspections. Right. Similar to if it's on a private septic system. So Title V of the, the Health and Sanitary Code, to make sure that the septic system is in proper working order, because nobody wants a real shit show. You get into a house and the plumbing backs up. Okay. So you got to make sure that it's also a passing septic system. So in common language, it's called a Title V inspection to make sure that the septic system complies with Title V of the Sanitary Code. Basically that the septic system works. So again,
and of course, it would be on the seller to fix it if there's a problem. That could
exactly.
Exactly.
So it's up to the seller to have that inspection done and produce that passing certificate. And if there are any problems, if it's not working, it's up to the seller to fix that, because the closing can't take place without a passing Title V certificate. And again, that's only if it's on a private sewerage, not the town sewer. So this is a private septic system. So in a traditional sale, those are costs that are assumed by the seller. And in the state of Massachusetts, there's also something called tax stamps. So think about it basically as a sales tax on real estate. Okay. It's at a cost of $4.56 per $1,000 of the sales price. Okay, so they're called the tax stamps. And of course, our wonderful legislature has to get their cut of the transaction. So that's money that goes to the state, and it's, like I said, tax stamps. It's a tax on real estate sales. So in a traditional sale, the seller is paying for those tax stamps, the smoke and carbon monoxide detector inspection, as well as the septic inspection. Typical, common in Massachusetts, sellers are going to pay for all those.
Plus the remedies if there are any issues to get.
Exactly, yeah. Plus to fix those if those initial inspections come back that they're not passing. Not necessarily the case with a foreclosure. Okay, so coming back to a point we talked about earlier, the purchase and sales agreement. So the purchase and sales agreement is a non-negotiable language in that document, and that document typically pushes the cost, the responsibility for those items and the costs associated with it, pushes it over to the buyer's side of the table, meaning that the buyer has to pay for the Title V inspection. The buyer has to pay for the smoke cert inspection. The buyer has to pay for the tax stamps at the closing table. Now, the buyer's not responsible for remedying any failures. So if it doesn't pass a Title V, well, that's still on the seller to fix it, or not. But if they don't fix it, you can't get to the closing table. Okay. Same thing with the smoke certs. But unfortunately, I've seen some consumers get really unpleasantly surprised when they arrive at the closing table and there's a $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 additional charge for tax stamps that they weren't aware that they needed to pay. And unfortunately, it always seems to be with a newer, newly licensed real estate agent that hasn't worked with foreclosed properties before, that didn't review the contract with them and didn't show them, well, yeah, here's an additional charge that you're going to have to pay because it's a foreclosure. So again, it's just what you don't know can work out to be a huge expense. So again, it all kind of comes down to, okay, you think you're getting a great deal with this foreclosure, but you sort of add up all these, I don't say the things that can go wrong, but all these additional pieces to the puzzle that you're responsible for as the buyer on a foreclosure. If you add all that up and compare it to a traditional sale, is it really such a great deal? Maybe, maybe not. So I'm not trying to talk anybody out of it, but just sit down and do the math and really compare apples to apples here. You may be better off purchasing a home that is not in the REO, not in the foreclosure world, that all the updates and repairs and everything have been made. Sure, that may come at a higher price tag on that contract, but you're not dealing with, in most cases, all these extra little steps and costs along the way. So, pros and cons on both sides, Declan.
Yeah, so you're paying for added value, right? Somebody takes care of their own home, particularly if it's an owner-occupied home, separate from the foreclosure situation. You're looking at, you're paying for added value because they're putting that value into that home. Yeah. And you miss out. I think we think we touched at all the points. It's not only you're paying these extra costs at the closing, but you're buying it as is where it is. So it's like, okay, there's a problem with the chimney. Too bad, right? The roof might need to be repaired. Too bad. That's on you. Are you still buying the property?
Yeah. So written into that, that purchase and sales agreement, the as is, where is a statement has a lot of emphasis. Typically, the bank is just not going to make any repairs. Even I've been involved in transactions with clients like the Title V. If it doesn't pass, they say, oh, well, we'll just wait until a cash buyer comes along that doesn't need financing, so we don't have to fix the septic issue, which seems absolutely ludicrous. But again, you're not dealing with an individual. You're not negotiating with a person or a group of people. You're negotiating with a spreadsheet with policies and procedures and a formula.
Right. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I mean, again, as you said, there are, I hate to say it, there will be opportunities. I expect that there will be opportunities over the next 2, 3, 4 years to buy foreclosure properties. I think a big part of this is just make sure that you go in with a clear head that you know what the pros and cons are, have the list, like anything else. And you plan, you itemize what your items are. If you already know about the sales tax, if you already know about the septic, what the high number and the low number might be, you put your own spreadsheet against and put it up against their spreadsheet, and hopefully you come out on top.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the type of discussion that I have with every consumer, every new client that is interested in purchasing a foreclosure. If that's sort of their mindset, that's what they want to go after. And I don't say it to discourage anybody, but just to have a reality check.
Yeah.
This is what to expect. If you're going in with your eyes open and you know what to expect, then you can make a adequate decision as to whether or not it really is for you, rather than getting halfway or 3/4 of the way through the process and then all this stuff comes up and it's sort of that oh shit moment. I wish I knew that at the beginning, otherwise I wouldn't started this.
Right.
So I want to try and prevent clients from having that oh shit moment. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I started this process. If I had known that, I would not have gone down this road. And there are some clients that say that, okay, thank you for telling me that there's all these extra moving parts. It sounds like that's not for me. Okay, great. And there are other clients that say, okay, thank you for letting me know that's what it was. Now that I have a better understanding of it, yes, that's still what I want to do. I understand there's going to be some moving parts and maybe some additional costs, but in order to get, again, a deal, I'm willing to take on those extra costs, that added risk, because that's what I want to do. So it's knowing what you're in for. You got to have the right information so that you can make the right decision as to whether or not you want to pursue that.
Yeah, and again, I think if you work with if you don't have that information, if you work with the right professionals, they can get you that information. So you get the right real estate agent, get the right mortgage broker, work with an attorney, maybe that's also familiar with foreclosures.
Yep.
And you should get off at least on the right foot.
Yeah. So just on a sort of a wild tangent here, as a consumer, I think the mass media has trained consumers to ask a couple of questions just about, from the mortgage space. So what are your rates and what are your closing costs? From the real estate agent, what's your listing commission?
Yeah.
From the attorney's, point of view, what's your hourly rate or how much do you charge? So they're looking at it strictly from a dollars and cents perspective, which is important. You need to know what the cost is, but I think more so, I'd love to be able to shift the consumer's perception of that and take a look at it. You're not just paying those dollar amounts, you're hiring somebody to help you with a large financial transaction. You shouldn't just be looking at the cost, but you should be looking at the individual who you are hiring to help you with that transaction. So what's that individual's background? What's that person's resume? Did they just pass the real estate exam last week? Have they been a loan officer for all of 2 months? Or like Declan and I, been in our respective businesses, more than 20 years. So I think the experience level,
what's the cost and what's the real cost?
Well, exactly. So sort of that old saying, you think it's expensive working with a professional, try working with an amateur.
Right.
And like this list of things we've gone through, if someone hasn't had any length or depth of experience in the real estate or lending business and hasn't had length and depth of experience with specifically foreclosed properties, it's the Poseidon adventure. I mean, you just don't know what you don't know until it blows up right in your face. So I think there's certainly a decent amount of value for the consumer to not just ask about rates and fees and costs, but dig in a little bit to the resume and interview the individual about their experience over and above just what the charges are. And the same thing goes for attorneys too. So obviously, Declan's a real estate agent. I'm a mortgage lender. We don't have an attorney on here, but it's the same. You're building your team, and you want to make sure that you've got the right team in place. Not like the group project in high school or college where one person seems to do all the work and everybody gets the credit. You want to make sure that everyone is an expert in their area and is able to pull their weight to get you to the closing table successfully. And while we're pointing out a lot of the negatives here, there certainly are a lot of positives to being able to buy a foreclosed property. Again, the value component of it, being able to get a property that may be undervalued because of the stigma associated with a foreclosed property, or maybe it does have a little bit of deferred maintenance. You can put in some sweat equity. But again, it's having the right team around you to get you to the closing table, because finding a foreclosed property that seems like a great deal isn't going to do anything for you unless you can actually get to the closing table with it.
Yep. So I would say, kind of almost in conclusion, you talk about the 3 L's of real estate. We just talked about the location, location, location. I would say at the early stages, there's the 3 H's: homework, homework, homework. If you know what you're getting into, then you should be fine.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think that's a good conclusion and wrap up to the show. Thanks everybody for tuning in. The Wicked Awesome Report, broadcasting every Tuesday and Thursday at 10 a.m. live right here on social media. Give us a comment, give us a like. Head over to Wicked Awesome Report Facebook page. Be notified when we have a new video that's posted. This has been a discussion about buying foreclosed properties. Hope everybody got a little bit of good info out of it. And if nothing else, maybe think twice before you launch full in with that being your path here of desiring to purchase a foreclosed property. Want to thank you, Declan, co-host here at the Wicked Awesome Report. Declan O'Toole from Select Real Estate. And I'm Patrick Queally, your friend in the mortgage business, co-host here at the Wicked Awesome Report. So let's wrap it up. Hope everybody out there stays well. And until the next edition,
see you
stay
guys
awesome.
on Thursday.
All right. Take care.
Right.
All right. Let's wrap up the broadcast here.